Hello Year 9. Today we're going to try something different. I'm going to record a PowerPoint for you of the lesson, and as we go through that PowerPoint I would like you to pause at the appropriate times and complete the tasks that I ask you to do. Today's lesson is called What Was Life Like in the Warsaw Ghetto? In the lesson we're going to continue our look at the Holocaust, and we're going to try to understand and describe life in a Jewish ghetto during World War II, and can think about how the ghetto system within Nazi-occupied Europe was set up as a precursor to the Holocaust itself and the mass murder and genocide of Jewish people in Europe. So here you can see a series of images from a ghetto in World War II. You can see walls, you can see people escaping. Have a look at these images. What can you see? What connects these images? Why do you think these people are doing this? So all those images showed people trying to escape the ghettos established in Nazi-occupied cities in Europe. In total, the Nazis established 356 ghettos in Poland, the Soviet Union, the Baltic states, Czechoslovakia, Romania and Hungary between 1939 and 1945. Not all those ghettos were the same. There was no uniformity to those ghettos. In small towns, the ghettos would not be sealed off and would often be temporary. They were used until those residents could be moved to larger ghettos. In larger cities, such as the Warsaw Ghetto, which you can see here, they would be properly established with boundary walls and barbed wire or wooden fences to literally seal off the Jewish population of a city from the non-Jewish population of the city. You can see here you have the non-Jewish population of the city undertaking their business, and on the other side the sealed off ghetto. Guards would be placed strategically at gateways and other boundary openings, and Jews were not allowed to leave the so-called Jewish residential districts under penalty of death. Within the ghettos itself, you can see from this image that conditions were horrific. Here we can see the starvation brought about by the Nazis forcing those people to live within the ghettos. These images are particularly interesting. Here we see a group of children wearing a yellow star, which would have the word Jude written on it, which in German translates as Jew. This is so that Jewish people could be easily identified and make escape much more difficult. That is not to say that resistance did not happen. Here we have an image of the end of a Warsaw ghetto uprising, in which Jewish people did fight back against the Nazis to stop the conditions in which they were living in. So ghettos were an area of a city where Jews were forced to live separate from the rest of the people of that city. In the ghetto they would be forced to work and given starvation rations. There are a number of reasons that the Nazis established ghettos. Originally a short-term measure to contain and control Jews, ghettos were soon incorporated into the Nazis' long-term racial policy. I'd like you now to pause the video and write a definition of a ghetto in your books or on your paper. I want you to use all of these words within your definition. So pause the video now. Okay, here's my definition. A ghetto was part of an occupied city in which Jewish people were forced to live by the Nazis during World War II. It was guarded by local police officers and German soldiers. Any Jew who escaped the ghetto would be killed. Use my definition to add or change your definition. Now, to add more context to our study of ghettos within Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II, we're going to watch this short video from the US Holocaust Museum.
Before World War II, Warsaw was the center of the Jewish population of Europe. Jews had lived there for over 500 years. By the eve of the war, fully 30% of the city was Jewish. In 1939, the Germans conquered Poland very quickly, and World War II began. The Germans had planned to deport the Jews. However, the plans didn't immediately succeed, and so, as an interim measure, Jews were concentrated in cities and near railways, and these became ghettos. The ghettos were not an end in and of themselves. They were interim measures, again, on the way to deportation, and then later on to mass murder. Once the ghetto became a reality, the Jews trapped inside were its prisoners. They could no longer come and go freely as they wanted to. They literally went to bed one night and woke up the next morning surrounded by walls. And now at the entrance to the ghetto stood very intimidating symbols of authority, German guards and Polish policemen. Any Jew who was found outside the ghetto was unceremoniously shot. The Jews were sealed inside the ghetto. In September 1941, a German soldier who was stationed in Poland named Heinz Jost snuck into the Warsaw Ghetto with a camera, even though he was not authorized to take pictures there. Jost took over 150 pictures of the escalating chaos of the life and death in the Warsaw Ghetto. We have used 27 of those pictures in our learning unit. 1941, the year when Jost took the pictures in the ghetto, represents a kind of midpoint in the life of the ghetto. It had been about a year since the ghetto was established, and it would be almost another year until 300,000 of the Jews in the ghetto were taken and murdered at the death camp in Treblinka. At this point in time, the Jews were still struggling to survive the horrific conditions in the ghetto, and yet, as we will see, they had managed to build a society behind the walls of the ghetto with educational institutions, cultural institutions, and mutual assistance.
So that video adds more context to this idea of Jewish ghettos in occupied cities where Jewish people were forced to live by Nazi occupiers. I want to have a look more at that now by looking at some sources of information from the time. First, I'd like you to take a moment to pause the video and to draw this table in your books. I think you will need a whole page to fit this table in. Okay, now you've drawn the table, we're going to have a look at a series of sources, and you're going to use the information from the sources to fill in the table. The first source we're going to look at is source A. We're going to do source A together, and then I'd like you to try and do sources B, C, D and E by yourselves. So here's source A. As more and more Jews were brought in from neighbouring towns and villages, conditions became yet more cramped. Money for bribes was drying out, and was only ever the privilege of a few, and the poor people of the ghetto, skeletal and wretched, began starving en masse. In addition to death by starvation, a typhoid epidemic caused by the poor sanitary conditions broke out, meaning that by April 1941 the mortality rate in the ghetto was a staggering 6,000 people per month. Funeral carts would come and collect the bodies every morning between 4 to 5 a.m. Mostly the corpses were dumped naked in the streets. The families were forced to strip their relatives in order to sell their clothes. So as you can see from that source, it tells us quite a lot about the Jewish ghettos. For instance, It tells us that conditions were cramped, which led to starvation, death and disease, and that bodies piled up on the streets. The focus of the source is food and conditions. And to this question, do you think it shows the Nazis wanted to exterminate the Jews? Well, I said yes, because so many Jews were dying and the Nazis didn't stop. Using my example as a model, I'd like you to have a go at sources A, B, C, D and D. I think to do this properly will take you 10 to 15 minutes, making sure you read all the sources really carefully and considering your answers. So pause the video now. I'll put on the sources. Pause the video now and have a go at that task. Okay, now that you have finished that task, we've come to our final written task. In this task, I want you to imagine that you are a young person living in the Warsaw Ghetto. You're writing to an auntie and you want to tell them about life in the ghetto. As you write your letter, think about these questions. Why did the Nazis put you in the ghetto? How are you treated? Where do you live? What do you wear? What is day-to-day life like? What diseases are there? Do you know anyone who is trying to resist, physically or through establishing cultural institutions? Use these sentence starters to help you write the letter. Once you've written the letter, I would like you to submit your work on Show My Homework or via email. So I want you to pause the video now and have a go at that task, making sure that once it's finished you check for spelling and grammar. Okay, thank you very much Year 9. A slightly different type of lesson today. Please give me some feedback as to whether you prefer PowerPoints presented this way or in any other way. Look forward to seeing your work and hearing from you soon.